Alright, so today we're going to be talking about another case from Melbourne, Australia. I'm not trying to target this area, I just happened to find another super interesting case from this place. Just to give a little update on things, my cat Sasha right now isn't feeling too well. She gets sick sometimes and needs to go on antibiotics. The vets think they know what's wrong with her, but it's just something that needs to be contained. But yeah, it's a super shitty situation. I hate seeing her sick. So everybody wish Sasha well in the comments. Alright, but with that being said, we're gonna get straight into the case. Elmer Crawford was born in Canada in 1930. He was raised by his grandparents in Derry, Ireland until he moved to Australia when he was 21. In the mid-1950s, Crawford is at a party enjoying himself when he meets an Irish woman named Teresa. Teresa had also moved to Melbourne from Ireland, and the two quickly fell in love, and not too long afterwards, Teresa became pregnant. Being that Teresa was from a strict Catholic family, the two quickly found themselves married and in a quiet home in Glenroy, Melbourne, welcoming their first child, Catherine, into the world in 1957. 4 years later, Teresa gives birth to their second child, James, and then 2 years after that, she has their daughter, Karen. Elmer was not officially an electrician, but he was very handy with electrical work and was employed by the Victorian Racing Commission as an unqualified telephone mechanic. He was known by his coworkers and acquaintances as a man of few words. In fact, his coworkers noted that he would often go hours without saying a word while working. Despite this, his coworkers had no inclination that Elmer was capable of something very sinister. He seemed like a quiet but relatively harmless person. Those who knew him, however, knew that there was a darker side to Elmer. He had a very bad temper. One notable story is when he was experiencing car troubles while at home. He had just recently repaired a part on his car when it broke once again. Infuriated by this, he picked up a tire iron and proceeded to smash out every window on his car. He did this in broad daylight where multiple people could see him. Despite owning his own home, 3 blocks of land in Ireland, a car, a motorbike, and having somewhere between $3,000 to $6,000 in his bank account, which today would be worth over $20,000, Elmer was known for being a bit of a cheapskate. He also had quite an unsavory side hustle. Working in the electrical field, Elmer had access to a large amount of copper wiring at any given time. Elmer would often take this copper wiring from work and burn the insulation off. He would then sell the copper to a second-hand auction store, what we might call a pawn shop. Besides the copper, Elmer would steal anything from his place of work, whether it be money or toilet paper. In the month of June 1970, Elmer suddenly became deeply obsessed with cleaning all of the junk out of his house and yard. He took 2 weeks off work as a holiday break to pile up huge amounts of junk in his backyard and then set them on fire. The smoke from these bonfires would greatly concern his neighbors, some of whom would even think that the Crawford house itself was on fire due to the large amount of smoke emitting from the backyard. Elmer had also made several trips to the junkyard with his car filled to the brim with items. Once the 2 weeks Elmer had taken off work came and went, he did not return to work. Instead, he continued on his deranged cleaning binge. Elmer's coworkers reported that they were not aware of any problems he may have had at home, but it is reported that Teresa suffered from postpartum depression, which would have put a strain on their young marriage. Police searches of the house uncovered a letter written by Teresa addressed to her family back in Ireland. Teresa writes, "I have been so upset. But what's the use? I am 2.5 months now." Another excerpt continues, "So looks like I've had it this time. We were going to come up home this Christmas, but won't be able to as I'll be due the end of January." Police also found letters addressed to the editor of a pro-choice book called The Age, in which Teresa expresses opposing views on the issue of abortion. It is theorized from these findings that Elmer may have pressured his wife into having an abortion, which she would have been heavily against. Greg Fogarty is a man who grew up on the same street that these crimes took place many years after their occurrence. Throughout his childhood, he and his friends would often scare each other with tales regarding the house. The crimes that had taken place there were well known in the community. When he became an adult, he spent 3 years researching the topic in order to write a book titled Almost Perfect. Greg suggests that on top of his disagreement over whether to keep their child or not, Teresa may have also discovered some of Elmer's stolen goods and found out about the unethical ways he made money on the side. Fogarty suggests that Teresa may have threatened to turn Elmer into authorities for his crimes, and that this may have been one of the motives for the murders. This also may explain why Elmer found it necessary to go on a 2-week-long cleaning binge in which he discarded many objects which could have been stolen. Teresa knew of Elmer's character flaws, but she most likely had no idea that Elmer was capable of something much more evil than stealing from work. 2 weeks earlier, the couple had drafted up a new will in which Elmer took out an extra life insurance policy on his wife. On the day of July 1st, 1970, Catherine's friend Brenda knocks on the door and is surprised when Elmer answers the door instead of Catherine or her mother Teresa. Elmer is supposed to be working, but he peeks his head outside of the door and asks Brenda what she wants. She says that she's just there for Catherine, as the two always walk to school together. Elmer tells her that Catherine's not going to school that day and that she's not feeling well. Brenda walks off without giving it a second thought, probably just wishing her friend would get well soon. At some point in the day, Elmer goes downstairs to his fuse box and removes one of the fuse blocks. He proceeds to remove the wiring on this fuse block and then replaces it with heavier duty wiring and places the fuse block back where it was. He then takes 5 electrical leads and rigs each one to an extension cable meant to be plugged into a wall. On the end of each electrical lead, he attaches an alligator clip. He then sets his alarm clock for 2 a.m. When his alarm goes off, Elmer gets out of bed and retrieves an iron bar that he had stuffed through a garden hose. He proceeds to strike Teresa in the head while she is sleeping. Elmer then attaches all 5 electrical leads on his makeshift jumper cables to various soft areas on Teresa's body. He then electrocutes Teresa to death. Elmer then uses a hammer to bash all 3 of his children in the head. He proceeds to electrocute Catherine and James in the same fashion he did their mother, but for whatever reason, he decides not to electrocute Karen. Elmer goes out to his car and removes the back seat to make way for the bodies. He places all 4 of them down in the back and then covers them with a tarp, as well as an assortment of other random objects meant to provide cover. It is likely that he also attached his motorbike to the roof rack on top of his car in order to make a getaway later. He then drives at least 3 hours, over 100 miles, to Loch Ed Gorge, located in Port Campbell, a national park of Australia. It is likely that here he had scouted an area where he would like to dispose of the bodies at a previous date during the daytime. Elmer drives off the track, attempting to make it to the cliffside just over a blowhole. Unfortunately for him, he runs into a drainage ditch that his car is completely unable to get over. Outside it is pouring rain, but Elmer steps out of his car and spends the next 2 hours scrounging around in puddles for rocks to place in front of his car in a desperate attempt to create a makeshift bridge to get his car over the drainage ditch. When he decides to try the bridge he has just created, he finds that his car will no longer start. After many unsuccessful attempts, his engine finally starts back up and Elmer is able to just barely make it over the drainage ditch. When he arrives at his desired location, Elmer puts the car in park, steps out, and then ties a rope to the steering wheel. He places the other end of the rope in the trunk of the car and then closes it. He then fits a hose over the exhaust pipe of the car and then threads the hose through the roof rack and into the driver's side window of the car. Elmer's plan is to go home and clean up all of the evidence back at his house and then report the rest of his family missing. He hopes that the car is never located, but that if it is, the police will believe the 4 bodies will be the result of a murder-suicide committed by Teresa. Elmer places a hammer inside of a boot and then uses the boot to weigh down the accelerator pedal on the car. In the pouring rain, Elmer was likely thinking that he had sent the car clear over the cliffside and straight into the water. What the dumbass does not know is that the car failed to make it into the water. Instead, it is hanging off the edge of a rock ledge on the cliffside. The next morning, the rain clears up, and around 1:15, a couple of tourists are out hiking and enjoying the scenery in Loch Ed Gorge. The two are peacefully enjoying their day until they come across a car bizarrely hanging halfway off of a rock ledge over the water. The two notify local authorities, who call the National Park's rescue team to investigate. The car is very badly damaged in the front, and first responders are quick to note that there is some sort of pipe leading from the car's exhaust into the front window. They also note that the car is filled with many random objects, but cannot tell at this point that the bodies of 3 children and their mother are inside. Authorities aren't able to get the car off of the rock ledge or search inside of it on the first day, but in the meantime, police used the registration number to determine who it belongs to and sent officers to the Crawford home to investigate why their car had been found the way it had. Crawford is spotted by 3 girls traveling down his house's street at around 5:50 p.m. He reportedly walks to the end of his driveway, looks in both directions, and then heads back inside. At around 6:30 p.m., officers knock on the door of the Crawford family home. No one answers the door at this point, but police are not yet suspicious of any kind of foul play, so the officer leaves for the time being. At around 10 p.m. that same night, officers receive word from the rescue crew that back at the side of the car, a rifle and spots of blood were spotted inside the vehicle. Police head back to the Crawford residence and knock on the door once again. When no one answers, they make their way inside through a window in the back of the house. They are stunned to find that the beds inside the Crawford house were covered in blood that was still somewhat fresh from the day before. Certain spots on the carpet were wet, indicating someone had recently tried to clean them, and a bottle of cleaning solution was still foaming when police examined it. Investigators believe that Elmer was inside of the house when officers initially knocked on the door to ask about the car. He would have figured out that his seemingly perfectly laid plans were already beginning to unravel and decided to turn to Plan B, vanish off the face of the earth. Police believed right away that Elmer was the perpetrator of these crimes and that he was still alive. But they were somewhat worried that the coroner or other authorities might believe that Elmer was also inside the car that night and that he went through one of the car's windows into the water below. To test whether this was possible, police obtained a 1956 Holden sedan, the same make, model, and year as the Crawford's family car, and then replaced its contents as best they could to the night it had gone over the cliff. Police used life-size dummies to represent the passengers and used some of the contents from the original car to put in the back seat. Police then sent the car over the cliffside in the same manner that Elmer had. When the car went over the cliffside, it began to twist and then landed nose first into the same rock ledge. It is again unable to make it into the water, this time landing even further away from the edge as before. All of the dummies remained in the car. Police concluded from this experiment that it is unlikely Elmer could have flown out of the window at any point, given that the point of impact happened with the car nose first, which is most likely what happened the first time. The engine was pushed back into the car on impact, meaning any person in the driver's seat would have most likely still have been stuck there. Police do not know exactly where Elmer escaped to, but Detective Adrian Donahue theorizes that he may have settled into one of Australia's mining towns where he could have utilized his electrical skills to work where he would be paid under the table and remain off the radar. In 1977, a woman named Elma is on vacation with her husband in West Australia when she spots someone she is certain she recognizes. Elma had previously worked in the same auction shop that Elmer frequented when he sold his stolen goods and states that she never forgets a face. She alleges that she spotted Elmer while eating at a restaurant. His hair had been dyed red, and he had also gotten implants to fill in a receding hairline. She overhears him talking about plans to go to Calgary. Elma and her husband decide not to report this sighting to local authorities, but rather to wait until they arrive back in Melbourne to tell police that there was a sighting. They believed that local authorities wouldn't have any interest in the case, and frankly, they also didn't want to ruin their holiday. When police investigate this sighting, they're not able to uncover any further leads in this area. In 2005, Melbourne police announced that they had a promising new lead that may finally bring closure to the case that the community had still been affected by to this day. They state they had been working with police in Texas to identify a man who may be Elmer Crawford. The man was found with multiple IDs with different aliases, and the coroner finds that the man also mutilated his own fingertips in an attempt to eradicate his fingerprints. Unfortunately, when a blood relative of Crawford's provides police with a DNA sample 5 years later, it turns out not to be a match with this dead man in Texas. Multiple alleged sightings have been made of Elmer, but none have led to his arrest. One notable sighting came from a former trucker who used to work in the Australian outback, who believes he may have had a conversation with Crawford years ago.
So we started asking him questions. It turns out that he said he was from Melbourne. Anyway, I said, "Where's your missus?" And he told me she was long gone. I said, "What year did you come up here, mate?" And he said, 1970. "Why'd you leave Melbourne?" He said, "I had to leave in a hurry. I did something terrible." And I'm putting two and two together here, and I said, "You aren't that bloke the Victorian coppers were up here looking for a couple of weeks ago." And his body language changed. His head dropped, his shoulders shrunk, and he had that attitude, "Oh, told this bloke too much."
A $100,000 reward for information leading to the arrest of Elmer Crawford is still in place to this day, and police urge anyone who may have information on the case to come forward. Alright everybody, so I'm going to try to keep this video shorter. I'm not going to ramble here at the end. I got some Let's Not Meets coming, and I'll probably talk a little more on those, but hope you enjoyed the case, and hopefully this may lead to any kind of closure on this case, as always, and just stay safe out there.